He's going to talk to us about the Reformation Society and about the Magdalen Chapel, which I've told him very little about so far. So.
Well, let me say who I am and what I am here for. I'm the Reverend Horn, and I've been associated with the Scottish Reformation Society for 50 years now, and I was secretary and lecturer of the Society for 44 years, and I resigned 8 years ago, but I found that when I resigned they didn't make any provision for the Magdalen Chapel, and I offer my services to come to for like people like yourselves coming to the chapel to give you the information about it, and here you are today, and I want to give you a very warm Scottish welcome to Edinburgh and to the Magdalen Chapel. The Magdalen Chapel is one of the most notable of all the churches in the city of Edinburgh, very largely because of its wide range of uses and the people who have been using it over the centuries. Well, let me start at the beginning. The Magdalen Chapel was founded by a husband and wife. He had come from the southwest of Scotland to Edinburgh in the early 1500s, intending that he could make his way in Edinburgh, and he did, and he accomplished many things here in the city, and he married a lady by the name of Janet Ryan, and they're commemorated very much in the chapel by the two bottom shields on the windows here. You'll see MM, that's Michael McQueen, that was the man who I mentioned, and JR, that's Janet Ryan. Now, these are a part of the only intact medieval stained glass windows left in Scotland today. So they're very, very precious, and we guard them very carefully. And the other two are the Lion Wanton, symbol of Scotland, and the other one is the coat of arms of Mary of Guise, the mother of Mary Queen of Scots. So these are very, very precious windows for us, and we look after them very, very, very carefully. But that's how Michael McQueen came into the situation. And in the 1520s, Michael McQueen realised that he hadn't very long to live, and he wanted to do something by which he would be remembered. And he devised a plan, and the plan that was realised was the Magdalen Chapel. Unfortunately, he died before it was completed, but his wife, Janet Ryan, continued the project, and this is what you have today. Now, this area here is the area that was the beginning of the Magdalen Chapel. What's to the front of the chapel has these are additional parts that have been added. This is the Magdalen Chapel, and you'll find that it's got a very wonderful history running right through it. And I'll just point out some of the details of the chapel. First of all, I mentioned the windows. You'll see that there's these little figures up on the window there. These belong to an organisation known as the Incorporation of Hammermen. Now, that was a unified affair of 22 different crafts and professions, and these were linked by the fact that at some point in their craft and profession they required to use metal. And you'll see in that little figure on the wall there, that's the deacon, that's the person who had the oversight of the chapel and meetings and so forth. And in his hand he's got a hammer, and the motto of the hammerman was with hammer and with hand. And they also had to at some point in their craft use metal. So that I mentioned them because when Janet Wind died in 1553, it was the hammerman that took over the oversight of the Magdalen Chapel. And they've left us a very wonderful part of their history as well, because all these boards here, these are boards that have a very special name. In Scottish terms, they are known as broads, B-R-O-D-S. And a broad in a Scottish definition is a board with a special purpose. And the special purpose is that it's just telling you that what some people did to maintain the Magdalen Chapel. You start up at the top there, 1555, and you go right round the first two rows to this far corner, and then the final row finishes up here. And there's all kinds of things in there, but these are records of individuals, what individuals did for the maintenance of the Magdalen Chapel. And they finish up here in the corner at 1812. So they had that more than 300 years of looking after the chapel. So it's been very carefully looked after, maintained, right down through the centuries, and here we are today with a wonderful place, with a wonderful history and a wonderful association with all kinds of different things. Now, what was really the aim of the Magdalen Chapel? Well, it was more or less, in terms for Michael McQueen, not only to be something that he would be remembered by, but also something that would maintain him in the afterlife. It's a strange thing, but that was the thing, because that was part and parcel of the Roman Catholic situation at that particular time. But then, when we come to the 1560s, we have a different situation. Because in 1560, the first General Assembly of the Reformed Church in Scotland came to the Magdalen Chapel. This is something that's very wonderful indeed. Now, when you look at the history that preceded that, right back to the beginning of the 1500s, you find that it was amazing how things moved on. We had, for example, a man by the name of Patrick Hamilton. And Patrick Hamilton was one of the first men to leave Scotland to go to the continent and meet the reformers on the continent, and then bring back from the continent what he had learned and set the pattern for future situations. George Wishart followed Patrick Hamilton, and George Wishart was a great teacher, a great leader, a great organizer. And again, that was all part of preparation for what was to come. And the next person who came into the forefront was John Knox. Now, John Knox has been maligned in many ways, even with Scots people today, but John Knox was a man who did things for Scotland that changed the whole aspect of not only Scottish life, but life in other places. For example, he met here in December 1560 with 42 other men, and these men developed a situation from which the Scottish Reformation came. They produced the documents and teaching and so forth in every aspect of life in Scotland at that particular time, and gave Scotland a new vision of the religious life, and how that religious life would affect it in every way. And John Knox was at the centre of that from 1560 until 1572. He died in 1572. But let me just give you one instance that John Knox changed. There had been a lot of things done in the 1550s with regard to education. And John Knox saw this, and he was very concerned not only about the education of children, he was concerned about the education of ordinary people in the towns and cities, to be educated so that they could read the Bible for themselves. That was the whole aspect of it. And John Knox set to do that. And he established a very wonderful pattern of education at that particular time. And it all tied in with the religious aspect. Now, that was just the beginning. In 1578, there was another assembly held here in the Magdalen Chapel. The first one was to introduce the Reformed faith. Now, that had come from John Knox's experiences on the continent, meeting John Calvin and others, and the influence of Martin Luther. His books and literature are being brought into Scotland, and these things all tied up. But there was another aspect to what was happening, and this man who had been under the teaching of John Knox, he was attending another General Assembly, not in the Magdalen Chapel, but in another church in the city. But he brought it here to the Magdalen Chapel. And you'll be very surprised when I tell you that that man, when he brought it here to the Magdalen Chapel, he followed on what John Knox had done, and here in the chapel, Presbyterianism was inaugurated. A lot of people don't realise that it was here in a little church that the Presbyterianism was inaugurated. And wherever you go in the world today, and you find that there's Presbyterian churches, everything comes right back to here. And that's the great thing about the Magdalen Chapel. It was never classified as a denominational church, but the Magdalen Chapel has been not only building a denominational body, but it was the founder of it as well. So this is very wonderful to have this situation, and it gives a great impetus to folks like yourselves when you come visiting and you hear these kind of things. It makes you realise just how valuable those years of the 1500s were for not only Scotland but for the whole world. Then in the next century, it was the turn of the Covenanters. And you'll be learning about the Covenanters as you go on today, I'm sure. But the Covenanters were the people who stood firm to maintain Presbyterianism. There were those who wanted to change everything and do away with the Presbyterian situation, and the king wanted to be the head of the church. But the people who had been instructed and taught in the Reformed faith, they realized what was happening, and they made a declaration that Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone is the king and head of the church. And that was what was at the heart of the struggle of the Covenanters for 40 years, from 1660 right up until just before the 1700s. And it was a very painful time for the church. The king, for example, in spite of what the Covenanters said, the king said, "I am the head of the church." And that developed a situation where there was constant conflict between the Covenanters and the ruling body. And there were things that happened. For example, Charles II brought a rule in, and the 300 ministers left the pulpits in protest because they saw that their Presbyterian heritage was being torn aside. And instead of meeting in the churches, they met in wherever they could, with small groups and with large groups. And Charles the King said, he brought in a law that said all meetings, whether they're held in churches or on the fields or wherever they're held, they are illegal services. But they forgot to mention that there were still churches available. And one of the churches was the Magdalen Chapel. And the Covenanters met here on many occasions in spite of what the king had done and said, and it was used very, very much. For example, there was a lady who was involved with the Covenanters, and she was very concerned about what was happening, because when they were executed, their bodies were just taken and put into an open grave. But this lady said, "I want to see the Covenanters receiving, after their death, an honest and Christian burial." And that little table there, that's part of the mortuary table on which the bodies of the Covenanters were dressed for burial, for a Christian burial. And Helen Alexander worked hard in all kinds of things with these, she made sure that this place was going to be the place where the bodies of the Covenanters would be respected before they were taken to the burial ground. And that goes right through the whole story from the 1660s right through to the 1690s. The next century was the turn of another denomination. It was the turn of a Baptist denomination, because the first Baptist church in Edinburgh started here. Now, there was something very unusual about it, because when they were here, and they were here for nearly 20 years, there was something that was lacking. I'm sure you'll know what it was.
Unless you turn them upside down.
There was no baptismal pool here in the chapel. But they got over it. They had their service here in the chapel, and a mile and a half from here, there's a waterway that runs through that part of the city. It's known as the Water of Leith. And the people walked from here to the Water of Leith, and they were baptised there, and then they came back here to the chapel. But that was just another aspect of the religious aspect of the Magdalen Chapel. And you can go through, and right down to the present time, we have this wonderful tie with different bodies and different organisations. These are very wonderful things to talk about and to being able to talk to others about it as well. And I find that the longer I'm here, and in about three months' time, I'll have been 60 years in the ministry, and I'm enjoying my time in the ministry at the present moment in a way that I've never done before, because I'm meeting people, sharing with people, and there's been some very wonderful aspects of that coming through in these situations. Now, let me just say one or two things that show up here. For example, here is